Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson Clef.3.2. And we're going to be talking about some other clefs that we haven't talked about yet. So, normally when we see a G clef, it's centered on the second line as the treble clef. And historically, it would also appear on the first line of the staff. If you put it up on the third line, that would be equivalent to soprano clef. If you put it on the fourth line, that would be mezzo soprano clef. If you put it up on the fifth line, that would be alto clef, so that would just be redundant. But putting it down here creates a new arrangement of lines and spaces. You have G on the bottom line, G, B, D, F, A, and A, C, E, G in the spaces. So the letter names are actually exactly the same as your standard bass clef centered on the fourth line, but the pitches are 2 octaves higher. So bass clef, that would be G2. Here it's G4. This was used in France in the 1600s and 1700s for flute and violin music. Oh, and I made a misrepresentation to you in the previous video. This is the one where I couldn't find any historical reference for the order of sharps and flats, but this is what Sibelius, my music notation software, says, so we're going to go with that. We have alternating upwards and this 2-3-2 going up for the flats. Cool. Then other bass clefs would be equivalent, because if you put a bass clef on the bottom line, then middle C is the middle line, so that would be alto clef. If you put a bass clef on the second line, that would be the same as tenor clef. So here on the third line, this is equivalent to the baritone clef that we looked at. And I mentioned in the previous lesson that both of these forms are seen historically. This one is actually probably a little more common. So it's the same arrangement of lines and spaces as we looked at last time. And then the final possibility, fourth line is regular bass clef, and then putting it up on the top line is known as the sub-bass clef, which was used historically for some low bass parts, and the order of sharps and flats is the same as treble clef. Isn't that nice? So you could make some super big staff and get all the staff lines in there, and these clefs represent the relative positions of notes. So if you have French violin clef, this is going to be G4, this is still G4, this line is G4 all the way through. So you can see how lines transfer between different clefs. So, for instance, treble clef and soprano clef share 4 staff lines. It's just the top one disappears and a bottom one gets added. If you're going from treble to bass, those share no staff lines whatsoever, which we knew because there's middle C in the middle that neither of them has. But if you're going from, say, alto to bass clef, the bottom line of alto clef is the same as the top line of bass clef. So, this is a pretty neat diagram. I made myself very happy when I created this diagram. Just a handy thing to have around. You also have some octaves, symbols. You have some clef symbols that indicate octave transpositions. Sometimes these are used for these instruments. I try to use them whenever possible. But more often it's just a regular treble clef, and you're assumed to know, oh, of course this transposes 2 octaves up, because everyone knows that crotales transpose 2 octaves up. I think it's kind of nice to have that indicator. So if you're going 1 octave up for piccolo, xylophone, celesta, or sopranino and soprano recorders, then you have an 8. If you're going 2 octaves up, you have a 15. You might say, why isn't it 16? It's that stupid off by 1 thing that intervals do. If you haven't gotten to the intervals section yet, you'll figure that out. This is an old form of transposing an octave down with the treble clef. These two are the same thing. So this is an octave below. For guitar, tenor voice, bass flute, bass oboe, a few other things. Tenor voice is the most common place you'll actually see an octave inflected clef. This is pretty common to see with the tenor voice, and it's less common to see for the instruments. You might have an octave up bass clef for bass recorder, and you might see an octave down for double bass, electric bass, and contrabassoon. So this shows the note middle C in all of the clefs. This transposes 1 octave up. This transposes 2 octaves up. 1 octave down, 1 octave up, 2 octaves down. I'm sorry, one octave down. That's not right, because middle C is there. This pencil does not have an eraser. Oh well. Last clef we're going to look at is a neutral clef, which you would use when writing for unpitched percussion. There may be fewer than 5 staff lines, depending on how many lines you need for whatever percussion you're writing. And the lines can indicate different things depending on the context, but these are just 2 ways to write, like, hey, this is like unpitched percussion music that doesn't have any pitched clefs, but I still want to put a clef. So you would put one of these. That's what I got. I'll see you next time.